things that you need to know now. So she's going to update us on those. She has been the manager there for 18 months. She's been in water quality now for 15 years. And she is a graduate of the U of U in engineering. So we appreciate her coming today. I know she's going to have some good updates and things for us to share. So let's take that in and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Looks like it's on.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, Julie's here. Hi, good morning. As Brad mentioned, I'm Kim Shelley with the Division of Water Quality. I manage the surface water section at the group of 8 engineers and scientists, and we are responsible for the UPDES program, which is the Utah Pollution Discharge Elimination System program, which means we permit discharging facilities, primarily POTWs and industrial facilities. We also administer the USMP program. We conduct inspections as well as enforcement. So we kind of do a little bit of everything in our shop, and glad to be here today to give you guys a little bit of an overview of the USMP program, how it originated, where it is now, and what to look forward as the permit is renewed in 2017. Oh, maybe not. Is that it?
Is it going?
Oh, there we go. Okay. Just kidding. Okay, so all of these photos in the presentation are taken during inspections that were conducted in Utah. So I apologize if your face suddenly flashes on the screen. Trying to protect the innocent here and leave any names and whatnot off. But anyway, the presentation today is just the history, the applicability of the USMP program, definitions that are new to the state that we previously haven't defined, the requirements, the implementation schedule, and what's lying ahead for the program as a whole. So the history, back in 2008 and 2009, EPA headquarters, which is the based in Washington, D.C., the national group had an initiative to reduce the amount of sewage discharged into surface waters across the United States. They were primarily concerned about combined sewers. The big issue for most of the eastern states. Here in the West, it's not an issue. We don't have any combined sewers in the state, and we're also an arid region. So with that initiative, they required all the states to go out and inspect facilities using the UPDES permit as the authority to go in, inspect, and their assumption was that we would file enforcement, so that we would find something wrong. We conducted the first year 3 inspections. Salt Lake City was the first one right out of the gate. That was a joint inspection with EPA. We spent a full week there going over their system from top to bottom. We found nothing that caused alarm. Next was Provo and Orem, same thing. We spent a week at both facilities, top to bottom. Both of them were top-notch as well. That was a concern for EPA because they were assuming everyone was doing something wrong. There's got to be something somewhere that someone isn't doing. Walt Baker, our director, didn't like the one-size-fits-all approach the EPA headquarters has taken and wanted to develop our own program to set the bar for Utah. This is what works for Utah. Let the programs themselves decide what their cleaning schedule should be. It shouldn't be dictated by the division. What their maintenance schedule is, how often they should, survey their lines and manage the system as a whole. It shouldn't come from somebody other than the entity itself. So with that in mind, it took us 3 years to develop the USMP rules, work with the stakeholder group. Probably some of you in this room participated in that process. We came up with a rule, first in the state and first in the region, which outlines basically all of the requirements, kind of the minimum requirements for facilities to maintain compliance with the USMP program. With that program in place, we conducted 3 more inspections. 2 of them were at South Davis Sewer District. 1 of them was in Logan, and that included their satellite systems, Nibley, Providence, et cetera. And we found the same thing, no concerns. These systems are running well and operating very well. They all have their own different approaches, and that works great with our program. After that, we sent a thanks with no thanks letter to EPA saying we have our own program. We will not be conducting these audits, mandatory audits, and EPA accepted that. So we haven't been out to inspect any facilities since 2010. We do ask questionnaires for facilities that also have treatment associated with them. So if you are tied to the treatment system, we will ask some general questions. I know we've done that. I'm trying to think here, Salt Lake City again, because it's come up. South Valley Sewer was some of the lines that they, we've asked them some questions as well. And that's how we're kind of checking the box with EPA. We would like to start the audits again, just so we get a better idea of what is occurring across the state. We haven't been in the southern part of the state, so possibly St. George and Cedar City might be facilities that we would start with. Those are just kind of informational, just a reconnaissance inspection. It wouldn't be a compliance audit necessarily, but it's more for our information, just to see if the USMP program is working. Are there things that we need to change? We do have a renewal coming up in 2017. We want to make sure that we're getting it right and it's working for everyone involved. So that's a lot of information right there, but a little bit of history as to why we have the program that we do. As many of you know, the program applies to all systems except for private. So federal, if you're a federal system, you must submit a notice of intent. State, municipality, everyone. We have facilities from Hill Air Force Base, all the way down to Linden. So just a wide range of facilities. If you're a private system, you're not covered under this rule. That's potentially one gap that we might need to somehow address. But if you're a public system, you are covered and required to comply. Part of this rule, we did develop a number of definitions that we haven't previously defined in our rule. Those being best management practices as applicable to a collection system, SECAP, SSMP, etc. So all those rules all those definitions are laid out in the first page of the rule. So if you have an opportunity to check those out, if you ever have a question on what does this acronym mean, go ahead and go to the rule and you'll be able to identify it pretty quickly. One thing that is defined is a permittee, and that's the owner of the collection system. We do have cases where we have two. We have an owner and an operator. Hill Air Force Base is an example of that. In that case, they'll both be permitted. If you ever have a question on whether your facility needs to apply for coverage or your joint operator or owner, please contact the division and we'll walk you through that. Another definition that we previously haven't defined, but everyone seems to know what it is when they see it, is a sanitary sewer overflow. And so what that means is any wastewater, any sewage escaping is intended conveyance system. So we have people saying, well, if it goes into a basement, that's just part of my backup plan. That's not really an SSO, but by this definition, it is an SSO because it does leave the system that it was intended to be conveyed in. Everything under this permit, every collection system is covered under this permit, and it should have applied for an NOI as of 2012. We are still working on our database to identify where the gaps are, who hasn't applied, which systems are missing. Currently, we have 170 systems covered under this program. We think that number is low. We're guessing that 75–80%, but we're not 100% sure. So we'll be reaching out to those facilities that we do identify have not applied as soon as we can. If you are a new system and you obviously haven't applied, you have 3 months before you operate your system to submit a notice of intent. The one-page sheet, currently we're old school, we have the paper copy. You mail it in or fax it into our office. And we do have an online system that we will be implementing next year for the renewal to make it much easier. But keep that in mind as you're planning for next year's renewal. So some of the general provisions within the rule itself is any discharge or any SSOs are prohibited. And it also defines any discharge. It doesn't necessarily have to reach waters of the state, but anything that is a health or human risk to human health or the environment is considered prohibited by this. It doesn't necessarily mean that the division will take enforcement, but it is something that you need to be aware of, that we're trying to minimize any releases from your system into the environment that might either impact flowing water, live water, or could potentially put the public at risk. The collection system should also be properly maintained, have adequate capacity, trained operators, and allocation of adequate resources. And this gets to what Brent was speaking about this morning, and that's your budget. We realize that it's difficult, I know, coming out of the recession that occurred in 2008, 2009, it's difficult to get back on track and to convince your councils and your boards that you do need resources to operate and maintain your system properly. That is one of the requirements of this rule. I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of it. And if you ever need any assistance from the division, you know, we can certainly have our outreach coordinator attend one of your council meetings, or send a letter of support if you need that to convince your council or your board or your mayor that additional funding is needed. We're happy to provide that assistance. So within the rule, we have two types of SSOs. We have a Class 1 SSO and a Class 2. Class 1 is a significant SSO, and it's specifically in the rule, it goes through and defines it's not caused by a lateral obstruction. It affects 5 or more private structures, affects 1 or more public, commercial, or industrial structures. It may cause a public health risk. That's a little subjective, but usually we work with the facility to identify if there is a risk. If it occurs in a busy road, that's pretty obvious that there is a health risk there. If it's in an isolated area, that condition wouldn't apply. If the SSO is more than 5,000 gallons, or if it's a direct discharge to waters of the state. Just so you're aware, a storm drain is considered waters of the state because the majority of them are connected directly to live water. So if it reaches a storm drain, that is considered water of the state. All of the Class 1 SSOs must be reported to the Division of Water Quality within 24 hours of your system becoming aware of the release. We also require that you follow up with a 5-day written report of we call it the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and how are you going to prevent it from occurring in the future. Class 2 SSOs are, again, not caused by a private lateral obstruction, and anything other than just a capital, anything other than a Class 1 is considered a Class 2. As I mentioned, we've got 24 hours. You can call our main line at 801-536-4300. You can either speak to our receptionist and she'll direct your call, or you can call Jennifer Robinson, who's the program coordinator, directly. Also, the 5-day report should be submitted to our director, Walt Baker. If you have any questions, Jen is happy to help with clarifying what the requirements are. Class 2 SSOs do not need to be reported to the division. These are basement backups. These are just burps that happen in the street and are immediately cleaned up and no public health issues or impacts to surface water. Those do need to be documented and then reported on your MWPP annually. Those are due to our office by April 15th of every year. Currently, we do only accept a paper copy. We're working towards getting an electronic version to make it much easier if you just want to email it in. Jen will be sending some information out just so you're all aware of what your options are for submitting those reports. So within the plan, of course, you have your sewer system management plan, which is very well defined. We have the minimum conditions that this SSMP must contain. We aren't prescriptive, other than we're saying we're not going to tell you how often you need to clean, et cetera, but we do need to know what your records are, what your organizational information is, things like that to help us better understand what's going on in your system and to make sure that you have the adequate resources to operate your system properly. So an example, in the plan itself, you can just have an org chart. We need to know who's doing what with the sewer, who is your direct responsible charge, who is responsible if there's an overflow, who are the people that would be required to take action. It can be a simple chart. It could be handwritten titles with phone numbers associated with it. It doesn't need to be too fancy. Also, the SSMP must have a legal authority, typically in the city code, if you're a municipality. That must prohibit illegal discharges from your system, It's got to require compliance with your pretreatment program or the treatment plant's pretreatment program if you are a satellite system. It includes the prohibited discharges in the 40 CFR, which is the federal regulations. If you have any question on those, Jen can walk you through that as well. We also require that you have proper design and construction, and those must be in compliance with our rules. That's John Mackey's group, our engineering manager, and he can also assist you with that. Also, for facilities that have more than 2,000 connections, you must have a FOG program in place, and all facilities must limit FOG and other debris. You also must have the authority in rule or in your city code to inspect your industrial users, just to make sure that they're doing what they need to do in protecting your system. You also must have enforcement authority. We have a model program on our website that talks about, here are some ideas that you might want to include, and we do have a page on enforcement authority and what it would look like, so if you want to check that out. You must also have an O&M component to your SSMP. Mostly what we're looking for is a system map. It doesn't need to be an electronic map. In fact, we were at one of our inspections in Cache Valley. They had a paper map, and those guys knew their system up and down. You know, they knew exactly where their hotspots were. Everything was identified on the paper map, and everyone had access to it in their shop. We do like the electronic, of course, because it's easier for everyone just to pull it up immediately, but you don't have a requirement either way. It's whatever works for your system. Going further into O&M, you also need to describe how you're going to do your preventative maintenance. Cleaning, you tell us what your frequency is going to be. EPA, when we first started inspecting, said all the systems must be cleaned, the entire system top to bottom, once every 3 years. When we were inspecting facilities, we were finding that it really varied depending on the facility. Bountiful City didn't clean most of their East Bench locations, I believe it was once every 10 years, because it was self-scouring and they just didn't need to do it. So we were relying on you to tell us what works for your system. We also want to know if you have a hotspot list. While we inspected Salt Lake City, I was unfortunate to learn that one of their hotspot lists is right outside of a Red Iguana on North Temple. It's one of our favorite Mexican restaurants. They're out there pretty regularly cleaning out the lines and making sure that their FOG program, their oil and grease, is being removed, and they're doing what they need to do to keep those lines running. We also want to know if you have a rehab, replacement, and improvement plan. We don't specify what that needs to look like, but you tell us what your plan is, and you know, just in simple steps. This is what we plan to do in the next 5, 10. Your planning horizon is 20 years. That's great too. We want to make sure that you have training for your staff as well. These kind of trainings are great. You can specify that you will have your staff attend various trainings, either through WAU, Rural Water, the Trust, you know, as they come up, or 20% of your staff will be trained annually. So whatever works for your facility, we just need to know that your staff is staying current on what is out there in the most current treatment, O&M, everything that's available to them. Also, a big thing is your part and equipment inventory. Some facilities just had a simple log sheet. Others were more complex and had scanners, and it worked for them. But we just need to know that you have parts in place. So if you need to have an emergency repair, you've got them. You can run out and swap out a part, swap out a pump, do whatever you need to do to get your system back in operation if there is an overflow. Design and performance. So this speaks to our rules, specifically in R317 Part 8. And this is where if you're making a repair to your system or adding a new line to your system, I guess you need to work with our engineering group to make sure that you're in compliance with these rules. Typically, there's just kind of a best practice. We don't get too prescriptive in these rules either, but you will need to have construction approval and an operating permit, and you'll need to document that within your SSMP to make sure that, that you've demonstrated your compliance with these rules. Also, the rules require a sewer overflow response plan, and this should be attached to your SSMP. And this is something that's very important for the division. We want to know, how are you documenting your SSOs? How are you dispatching your people to address these SSOs? Is it a call down list? Do you have a crew that's on call 24 hours? How are you making sure that you've got the people necessary to make the adjustments after hours? Also, we want to know, how are you going to contain and clean up an SSO if it does occur? You can just have this be in general terms. You don't need to get too specific. But if you have certain areas, if you have a bridge crossing, we need to know how you're going to address that if you do have an SSO into that water body, and how you're going to hopefully mitigate the impact from an SSO. We want to know how you're going to follow up with customers. Customer complaints, I'm sure, are a big deal for most of you. And how do you address those? How do you handle when you do get a customer complaint, and how do you demonstrate that they've been addressed and won't be an ongoing issue in the future? Another thing as well is training. Always a good idea to keep people trained and ready in emergency situations. For systems that have more than 2,000 connections, you are required to have a fog control program. You know, we do have very simple fog control programs across the state. It can be just a 1 page, it can be 10 pages. Brent, I think, mentioned earlier this morning about having a way to notify, and Mike did too, notify your users of what's appropriate to put down the drain, what isn't. Many facilities translate that into multiple languages. If you have any of those flyers or outreach materials, it would be a good idea to document those in your fog control program. So if the division ever does request to review it, you've got the information in one location. SECAP is another thing that everyone should have completed by now, except for the very small systems. We spell it out over 2 pages. This is kind of the meat of the rule. Very specifically tells you what needs to be done as part of your system evaluation capacity plan. You've got to evaluate your existing hydraulic capacity, identify your system deficiencies, and this is really important to take a good look at your system. This should be done probably annually or every 2 years, depending on the size of your system. How's growth? Are you still able to meet that need, meet that demand? A surge charge analysis is also very important. Flow reduction and implementation, and also your capacity increase evaluation and implementation should be considered as part of this plan for all of the larger systems. We also talk about in the rule monitoring, measurement, and modification of any of these plans. So if you need to modify any of the plans for any reason, if it's a significant modification, you'll need to go ahead and republic notice those documents and then submit to the Division of Water Quality that's been public notice and approved by your governing body, either your city council, your board, or whoever has the authority, is the control authority, I guess, for your system. That certification will need to be submitted to the Division of Water Quality every time you make a change to your program. And within that, there are certain elements that would need to be included as well if you do make a modification. I'm going to document all the activities. We want to make sure that you reviewed, while you're in there making one change to your SSMP, you want to make sure that you take a look at the program as a whole, just as an opportunity. We'd like you to take a look at the SSO trends as well. And one thing, of course, is that the SSMP, when you do modify it or when it is developed initially, it must be prepared by a qualified professional. That doesn't mean that it needs to be a PE. It just means that it needs to be someone who has experience, either knowledge of your system or knowledge of proper O&M of a collection system. So the time frame for implementation, most of these states have passed. As I mentioned, the rule went into effect in 2012. Depending on your number of connections or the population of your service area, different dates apply. And this is taken directly from the rule. Most of them, the NOIs are required by November 2012. The SSMP was the first milestone that needs to be completed and implemented. The second one is a SECAP. So if you have more than 50,000 connections, you have 2 years to get that done. That should have been completed by June 21st of 2014. For the largest systems, you had until December 21st of 2014 to complete your SSMP. The smaller systems, you had until December of last year. To complete and implement the SECAP, you have 1 year to those dates. So most of them occurred in 2015, within the smaller systems of 3,500 to 15,000 connections. That was to be completed by June of 2016. The very small systems, less than 35 connections, you have until December 21st, and actually 2016, I believe. You have until the end of this year. So if for some reason you haven't met any of those milestones, please reach out to the division. Let us know so that we can work with you to make sure that, that you're staying in compliance with the rule. There are reporting requirements with this rule. They're primarily annually. If you don't have any Class 1 SSOs, as I mentioned before, the SSMP community modifications are need to public notice it and have it approved by your governing body, and then submit that certification to the division. That typically can be a pretty streamlined process. Just a 2-minute brief, I'm sure, to your board, and then a 1-page submitted to our director of wallpaper. As I mentioned before, the permit expires in September of 2017. What that means is that everyone will need to go ahead and reapply prior to September 30th of 2017 to maintain your coverage. We anticipate that the permit will start drafting the draft permit in early 2017. Public notice it. It'll be a 30-day public notice period sometime that summer, and then we will you'll have the opportunity to comment on the plan, or excuse me, on the permit, and let us know if there are any areas that we've fallen short or we've missed the mark and are in compliance with our rule. We don't anticipate any significant changes to the permit in 2017. As far as we're concerned, it's working. It's working for us. It's working for the systems that are covered under the general permit. But if you have any other ideas, please reach out to us ahead of time to let us know. You know, Jen is more than willing to meet with people if you'd like to come in and chat with the division to let us know if this component isn't working, or here's an area where the division didn't consider and we'd like to see it rolled into the general permit. We'll have a new notice of intent online submittal system. We had this in place 2 years ago, but haven't made the full transition. We're hoping to bring the division to the 20th century and get away from paper. So it'll be an online system that needs to create a user ID and submit the same information you would on a paper copy on the electronic version. And when we first developed the rule, we sent out postcards to all of the entities. We'll probably do that again, as well as post the information on our website. If you ever have any questions, again, reach out to the division. We're here to help you and to make the application process as seamless as possible. If you don't apply prior to September 30th, 2017, you'll have a lapse in your coverage, which means you're not in compliance with the permit and the rules. We do have, you know, an enforcement authority to encourage people to comply with the rule, but we certainly not exercise that in this case. We want to work with you to make sure that you go ahead and comply and maintain the continuity with the general permit. Fast talker today. That's all I have. I just wanted to point out, though, that Jen Robinson is the contact. She's on vacation this week, unfortunately, so I'm filling in for her. But you can reach her directly there. We also have an after-hours emergency line if you have a Class 1 SSO that needs to be reported. That's the 536-4123 number. You are required by the permit and the rule to notify the division within 24 hours. We also have more information found on our webpage at deq.utah.gov. We've done a recent rebranding of our webpage, and it looks very different. So the best bet is to just go ahead and type in USMP, and it'll pull up all the information, all of our model programs, everything else you'll need to develop to maintain compliance with the rule. Does anyone have any questions or concerns? Oh, Jeff, great.
A couple questions. think the biggest hurdle for a lot of systems is the SECAP part of it.
Mm-hmm.
How robust does that need to be?
Well, that's a good question. So in the rule, we have set the bare minimum. We just say you need to identify X, Y, Z and evaluate X, Y, Z. The facility gets to decide for themselves how robust. We would encourage them, of course, to make it as robust as they can, but it could be a simple 2 to 3 page document just identifying that they've evaluated all the areas identified in the rule. So very simple if need be.
So when it talks about capacity evaluation, though, we're talking not looking at a map and saying, that's about half full.
Yeah, right. Yes, good point. And that's part of the rule where, yeah, we wanted to leave it open so that we didn't have a one-size-fits-all system, but yeah, you use your judgment, and we would like some numbers and a full evaluation, not just that looks good to me, 50% full kind of thing.
And then if you talked about getting an operating permit for the line installed, if you are rehabbing and using a very place pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
does that change your plan?
No. So I know South Davis has done quite a bit of that in the past, and no, that doesn't change your plan. That's still essentially the same system, but that's a really good question. You wouldn't need to modify your SSMP. You wouldn't need to let the division know that you've done some certain place pipes. So, no, but if you're actually adding new lines or increasing the overall system, then yeah, that would fall under the modification and notification requirements in the rule. Yeah, great, thank you.